This video is a part of the Beginner's Guide to Masking in Blender series. Each video builds upon the information from the previous video, so if you're a beginner, it's best to watch them in order. And if you don't want to wait for them to come out one at a time on YouTube, you can get the entire series all at once for free by going to blenderfrenzy.gumroad.com. Just click on Frenzy Freebies, where you can get lots of stuff to follow along with my tutorials. Just click Add to Cart, and then check out. Fill in your email address, and use discount code FREEBIE to get $0 per month. Or, of course, you can pay $2 a month to show your support if you want. It's up to you, but either way, you will have access to lots of videos and files to follow along with my tutorials. Also, I've created a standalone course for this series that you can purchase if you want to say thank you. You will get everything from the Frenzy freebies, plus you will get access to my finished blend files, and you'll be able to download the videos for offline playback. So, thank you for your support, and on with the show. And now we can play it and we can watch it in real time. And it stays relatively close to our face. It doesn't hang off in the ways that it was before because of our animation, and I really like that. Welcome to Blender Frenzy. I am Justin, and I am back with you with a new headset today. If you've been watching my other videos, you know that my other one was going out and it was fairly old, and I needed an upgrade. Now this one is not very expensive, but it is wireless, and I hope that the sound quality proves to be somewhat good. I know some of you have complained about the sound in the past, but it's been upgraded and I'm really loving it so far, so let's get started. We are continuing our beginner's guide to masking in Blender, and each of the videos in the series builds upon the information from the previous videos. So if you haven't seen the videos yet, especially if you're a beginner, I highly recommend going back and watching those previous videos where we took still images and we talked about how to fashion the points and the splines of the mask to shape it around our object, and we went over a lot of the settings and the mask layers and how they all work together to create different effects. So we're going to take that information that we've accumulated so far and use it on video footage in order to blur out someone's face in a video. So open up a new instance of Blender, come to File, New, VFX, and I don't need to save. So we have these 4 tabs you can see here. And these are called workspaces if you're not familiar with Blender. And each workspace basically is just comprised of these areas. And these areas are fully customizable. You can click and drag them, you can resize them, you can collapse them into each other. So that's what I'm going to do. If you hover your mouse up here where you see the crosshairs, I can click and drag either direction and you see that arrow. And whichever direction I drag, I can let go and then it will collapse one window into another or one area into another. So I'm going to do that for this one, and then I'm going to do that for this one on the bottom going up. And then hover my mouse over here, press home to maximize that viewport. I'm going to do the same thing for masking. So over here, just click and drag, and click and drag, and then hover home. Okay, so you might notice these 2 workspaces are very similar, and they are. The only difference is this drop down. So you can see this drop down, we have mask, and this here we have tracking. So we technically don't need 2 workspaces, so you can always go back and forth using this, but I found it easier just clicking these 2 back and forth is easier. Now we're not going to be using the compositing workspace yet, so I'm just going to leave this as it is. Then we have a rendering workspace, which will help us out a little bit later, but let's click this plus and go to video editing and video editing. I'm going to collapse this window into this one, and this is where we're going to start because we want to import our footage in here. Now here you can use any of your own footage that you might want to use, or you can follow along with me using my footage. If you go to my Frenzy freebies on Gumroad, you can get this footage and you can even get this blend file for free if you type in the discount code Frenzy freebies. You'll get access to a whole bunch of stuff for my tutorials for free. So check it out to get that footage if you want to follow along. So what you'll do is hover your mouse over here, press Shift A to add in a movie. So navigate to the folder where your footage is. This is the one that's going to be available on the Frenzy freebies. Just double click that, and then you should see something that looks like this. So here's our preview area, and here's our sequencer, and here are the properties over here. I'm just going to adjust this for my head. And if you want to see the buttons that I'm clicking, it's this blue bar up here. You can see left button, right right mouse button, middle button. And this is because I can't currently get the screencast keys to work in Blender 2.93. So if anybody has any tips on that, please leave me a comment. But if you can't see this properties bar here, that's the N key, N like Nancy, that will toggle that open and close. So hover your mouse over the sequencer, press home, and then we can scroll with our mouse wheel to see all of our footage here. The top one is our video, the bottom one is our sound, and I can press A to select everything, and then come here to View, Range, and then set frame range to strips. Next, with my mouse hovered over here, press G to grab, and then if you move your mouse, they start moving. I'm going to press Y to constrain it up and down, and just move them up. This allows us easier navigation. I can also hold Control down and hold my middle mouse button down and drag my mouse. This allows us to resize it, so up and down and left and right. We'll scale that and zoom in and out. So there is pretty good. So we are going to achieve our face blur in 5 steps. Step 1, render out an image sequence. Step 2, create our mask. Step 3, track our footage, which is setting a point on our face so that Blender can follow it. Then after we track, step 4 is to parent our mask to that tracker. And step 5 is to animate the points to adjust them to our face. So step 1, render out an image sequence. The reason we do this is because Blender tracks better with image sequences. So we have to find a place in our footage that we want, because I don't want to render out the whole 2.5 minutes worth. So a couple ways we can do that. Hover your mouse over here and press spacebar to play.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so that's maybe pretty loud. We actually don't need the audio here, so this is the audio strip. I'm going to select this and press H to hide that. So spacebar will play through that, and you can see the playhead moving there. You can also pause here, so play and pause this way, like this. You can also take the playhead top here and then just scrub through that. And this is all to find a place that you might want to clip. So I'm actually going to clip, I think I know the ones that I'm going to do. And that's going to be right here where I finally get the high right, so right before my hand goes up here. And if I move my playhead right here, you can see this number here says 10 plus 19. This is 10 seconds plus 19 frames. If you look over here, our frame rate is 23.98 frames per second, essentially 24 frames per second. This is 10 seconds plus the 19th frame. So if I press the right arrow on my keyboard, I can arrow over through the frames. And after I get to 23, the next one is going to be 11, because that's the 24th frame, which means that's the next second. Let me adjust this over here. So now you can see these fields over here. This field is the current frame that the playhead is on here. So at 11 seconds, it's the 264th frame. If I click and drag in here, you can drag that around as well. I'm going to right click to cancel that action, so it stays on 264. I can also click in here. I think, if I remember correctly, I wanted to start at 240. So click and type 240 if you're following along with my footage. And we want to make this the start frame. So an easy way to do that is to hover your mouse over here, press Control C to copy that, and then in the start frame, Control V to paste that. And now instead of the start frame being at 1, it is now at 240. So I'm just going to go to the end of where I want my frame range to be. So something around when I put my hands down like this and I make that scary face. Yeah, something about right here. So this is 742, but let's just make this an even 740. So that's going to be our end frame. Control C to copy that and then paste it here in our end frame. And now you can see that our frame range is right here with the lighter area, and the darker area here is where it is out of frame, or out of the frame range. So I'm going to click this button here to go to the beginning, press and hold Shift and press B. I can click and drag around this area and it will zoom in there just like that. And again, Control middle mouse, I can adjust that a little bit better. Perfect. Let's save it before we forget. Okay, so I'm going to press play. And this is what we're going to be rendering out into an image sequence. So it will take every single frame and make that an image. So let's go to our rendering workspace here. Okay, make sure this says render result right here. If it doesn't, just select it from the dropdown. Then come to the output properties tab here. Scroll all the way down to post-processing and make sure sequencer is checked. And I'm going to also uncheck compositing because we're not using that right now. Now we can come up here to render and then render image, which is also shortcut key F12. And ta-da! we have rendered one single image of our footage. And if we come to video editing, you can see that is this frame right here, which is frame 420 we can see down here. Now, in order to see the frame range up here, you can actually change that if you go to View and then uncheck Show Seconds. And then now you can see this is 420. The shortcut key is Control T. You can toggle back and forth between the time and the frames pretty easy, which is useful. So the next thing I'm going to do is a pro tip. I'm just going to select random frames and press F12 to render them and make sure that they match. An easier way to do this is if I stay on my rendering workspace and then just drag out a preview area over here. So if I drag one out, so this works the same way as collapsing one. Just make sure you can see that crosshair in the corner. You click and you can drag a duplicate area out. That's the same as collapsing it, just like that. In this area, I'm going to select this box and change this to the video sequence editor. And then up here in this dropdown, I'm going to change this to preview. So this is the same preview as in our video editing, but now we don't have to go back and forth. So I'm going to bring this timeline up here, hover my mouse over here, press home, and that brings our frame range. And again, I'm just going to select random frames. Look, this is our preview. And then if I press F12, the render result here should match. And before we test out any more frames, let's do a couple other things here. Just come to Render Properties, scroll down to Color Management, and make sure your view transform is standard. This is filmic sometimes by default, and you can see the colors are a little bit more bland. That's because the colors are fine-tuned here for 3D modeling to make a 3D scene look more realistic. But for video, you want standard to keep the original colors of the video. Next, let's set up where it's supposed to go. So let's go to our Output Properties tab, and let's scroll up here and just make sure your resolution is how you want it. I like this. Everything is fine here for me. Down here in our output, I'm going to click in here and do a /, which is the current folder of your blend file, IMSQ for image sequence, _ footage, and then I'm going to do 1 / to make that a folder, and then I'm going to type in footage _ enter. And I'll show you in a minute why I put the last underscore there. Make sure file extensions is checked. File format, I want this to be a JPEG. You can choose whichever file format you want. Make sure RGB is selected. If you want color, this is black and white, of course. And then for image sequence, let's pull this out here a little bit. I'm going to uncheck overwrite, and you would leave this checked if you were actually wanting to overwrite an image sequence that you had and you wanted to update it or fix it in some way. You would click overwrite, and then it would overwrite all of the same frame numbers as long as the name was the same. So the footage _ and then whatever frame number. If there's any variation in the name, it won't override it anyway. Okay, and then under post-processing here, make sure sequencer is checked and compositing is unchecked. Okay, I'm going to save it, and now let's check some random frames in our footage. So we just want to make sure that a couple of frames at the beginning are good. And so I'm just clicking random frames and pressing F12. So a couple at the beginning and some in the middle here. And basically I'm just making sure these match. So here's our preview. If I drag my playhead, you can see the preview, and then F12 for the render preview. Yeah, it matches. And this is going to save you a lot of headache. And catch things that are wrong before you render out your whole image sequence. So this is looking good to me. So I think we're ready. I'm going to save it one more time. And then we're going to render out an image sequence, which if you come to render, instead of render image, we want to render animation. And the shortcut is Control F12. And now it's going to render out all of our frames here to the output that we have here. And our frame range is short, so it doesn't take very long at all. So now on to step 2, which is add in our mask. So let's go to masking, and we need to open up our image sequence. So we don't have anything loaded yet, so click open. And here you can see our new folder that we created, IMSQ _ footage. And if I double click inside here, you can see here is our footage. And I can come over here. This is the vertical list. I can also click in a horizontal list and a thumbnail list. And so we can scroll and see what that looks like. And so now we have our image sequence, which is one image per frame that we had in our frame range. And you can see the reason I added this underscore here is because the frame number followed by the file extension JPEG or JPG is added automatically. If I didn't have that underscore there, then the numbers would come right after the words, and sometimes that can get confusing, so having that separator is helpful. So from here, my suggestion is to go back to your vertical list because the order in which you import these is very important. So for example, if I sort these by size, you can see they're all out of order. So if you import it like this, the footage is going to be all erratic. So you want to make sure you're in a nice consecutive order starting from the start frame, which is 240. So if you sort it by name, that's exactly what's going to happen. If you want the footage to go backwards, you can actually just click this name one more time, and then it will flip it, and then it will start at the end frame and then go down. So that's one way you can do it backwards, but I don't want that. I want it forwards, so we're going to do it like this. Hover your mouse over this area, press A to select all of them, and then open, and we see we have nothing. But we will soon, so we can hover our mouse over here, press Home, to fit the dimensions in our preview. Pull this up here a little bit and hover over here, home again. And you can see as I'm scrolling through, well, you can see it starts here. We have something, but past 500, we don't have anything. And this is really confusing if you don't know what's going on, but it's an easy fix. You can see up here in your settings, if you don't see these, press the N key, and here are my keys again up here. It's recognizing our image sequence as the start frame being 1. But our start frame is 240, so I can either type 240 or I'm just going to copy this, Control C, and then Control V to paste that there. There we go. Now it recognizes 240 as our start frame, and we can scrub all the way through, no problem. Okay, so let's go back to the first frame. We can either press this or Shift left arrow, goes back to the first frame. And that's the first frame in our frame range, not frame 1. This is the frame I want to start our mask on. Depending on your footage and what you need, you might want to start somewhere else, but I'm going to start on the first frame to add our mask. And from the previous videos in the series, we already know how to add and manipulate our masks. I'm not going to explain this in too much detail here. If you want to know about that, check out the previous videos. So Shift right click to move the 2D cursor, Shift A and add in a circle. Just going to scale this out. Do like this. Alt S to scale the feather. And let's see here, our overlay. Yep, that looks pretty good to me for now. So let's name our mask here, mask face. And then let's come to our video editing. And we're going to use the same frame range here. And because it is the same footage and the same frame range, we technically could select our video footage here, go to modifiers, add strip modifier, mask. And now we want to change this to mask here, and then click inside here and choose our mask face. And ta-da! We now have the mask being applied to our footage, which means it's visible, and the area out here was black, which means it's invisible. If we come back here, we can see that, like that. And I'm going to come back to video editing, and I'm just going to pull out a separate window here, change this to our movie clip editor, and then load in our footage. T to close that, N to close that. And now we can scroll over here in the menu bar. Oh, we need to go to our masking first, and then scroll over and choose our mask face. And then we can just do this to see. So that's one way we can do it. I'm actually going to get rid of this over here. We're going to hide our original footage because I'm just going to import the image sequence that we have here. Shift A, add in an image sequence, navigate back to your image sequence, select everything and add image. If I middle mouse and click, I can drag this. You see it's added the image sequence to the first channel. I'm going to just come up here, G and then Y to grab that and move that up. Put that right here. I'm going to duplicate the footage, Y up, and hide the top footage because I want to make a blur on this. And actually I need room for that, so pull that up one more like this. Select this one, Shift A, Effect Strip, Gaussian Blur. Now we've done this in detail already with single images. Go watch that video, but let's hide this one and come to our strip and I'll do, what, 75? Yeah, that's good. So now select the top one, Alt-H to unhide that, and come over to modifiers. We're going to add the mask to this one. Mask face. And actually, I want to invert this because I want my face to be cut out and show through to the blur. Remember, we do that by coming over here, click invert, and we have to refresh, Control R over the sequencer, and this is what I want that to look like. I actually want to feather this blur out just a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. And so everything in here is transparent, but it's not showing through to the Gaussian blur because we need to go to strip and change our blend mode to alpha over. And now we can see it shows down through to the blur. So basically, it's like the camera is up here, it's looking down. If you think about these like layers, like Photoshop layers, anything that's on top will be on the top layer in the preview. You can also think about it as a camera looking down here. It's going to see this one first. If I hold shift and right click, you can see each of these here without having to hide and unhide them. So it'll see this one, recognize that cutout, and then shine through to the fully blurred image, if that makes sense. But we've already done this with a still image in previous videos. What we want to do now is animate this so it follows our face. So let's go to the first frame. Let's come over to our motion tracking. Let's load in our footage. And what we're going to do is track a point on our face that Blender will follow. And remember, this is just like our masking, except for instead of mask, we're on tracking. Let's pull this up down here a little bit and home, scroll out. So I want to track a point on my face so Blender can follow it. I'm going to come over to the tracking settings over here. If you don't see this sidebar, just press T like Tom. We'll change the pattern and search size in just a minute, but for the motion model, I'm going to change this to affine and then keyframe to match previous frame. Click normalize and keep everything RGB here. I find these to be the best settings, especially tracking a face. So let's add our marker. I'm going to track a point on the nose, like my nostril right here. Press and hold Control and then left click to add a marker. And then I'm going to S to scale. Ooh, that's a little bit too fast here. Let's move our mouse over here and then S to scale, and then we have more control, something like that. So we've changed our size of our marker, but the size didn't change over here because this information is before you add the marker. So in order to pull information from this marker, we actually have to click Copy from Active Track. And now we can see our pattern and search size and all of our other settings as well. Okay, next let's come over here, and if we don't see this, again, that's the N key, track tab, and then we're going to resize this to be more square to match our marker here. And if I hover my mouse over here, press G to grab, I can grab that and move that around, and you can see what's happening there. I can right click to cancel that action, and then I can also click and drag and move it in here to fine tune and adjust it if I need to. So basically Blender's going to look at this pattern here and try to follow it as our footage moves. And the way we do that is come over here to track. These buttons are also down here, but I'm going to track forward. The shortcut is Control T. And now you can see our graph being tracked down here as Blender tries to follow my nose up here. And this isn't too bad. Let's see what's going on here. I can click and drag in the header here so that we can see that's not too bad. So we're not worried about the shape of the marker, just the position. And in this case, a face blur, you don't really have to be that accurate. So this is good for now. So let's go over to our masking and let's parent our mask to that marker. So now we have that marker added. And all we have to do is select everything, but sometimes that can be tricky. So I'm just going to show you. I'm going to click out to deselect. You can also Alt-A to deselect. I've always found that it's better to select the marker first. And sometimes Blender's a little finicky when it comes to this. So if you can't select it very well, just make sure you scroll in and you might be able to select it better. But select your marker first, and then we can press A to select everything else. And then pretty easy, Control P to parent. And now we've parented it on the wrong frame. But before I clear that parent, let's come over here to mask. And you can see we don't have our parent information down here because we don't have an active point. All the points are yellow. So if I shift click on a point and then click that again, under active point, we can see what our parent is. So right now, this one point here is parented to track. Our object is camera, and if we come to our motion tracking, we can see that information down here. Here's the object, our camera, and the name of our track is track. So I'm just going to rename this to nose, and then we can come back to masking, and we can select nose. With everything selected again, Control P to parent that. And then if I play, you can see it follows. But again, we've done it on the wrong frame. So in order to clear that parent, you can come over here to clear, or the shortcut is Alt P, clear that parent. So you can use the shortcuts, or you can click over here. There's a lot of information over here that you can quickly access. Okay, Shift left arrow. This is the frame we want to start on. Control P, parent. And now if we play, we now have our mask following the tracking marker, which is following our face. And that's pretty cool. So let's see what that looks like in our video editor. Let's come over here, Control R to refresh, and go to the beginning and press play. Oh, and that is going really, really slow. And the reason for this, I believe, is the Gaussian blur. So I'm just going to hide that blur for now, and then yes, so this goes a lot faster. But you can see our mask isn't actually moving along with our face in our video sequence editor. Why isn't it? Oh, well, look at that. It starts moving right here. But it's moving out of sync. And this is because there's a difference between, if I come over to my modifiers, relative and absolute frames. So if I come back to frame 240, the absolute frame is frame 240. But the relative frame for the strip is frame 1, because this is the first frame of the strip. So if it's on relative, then our mask isn't actually going to start until the 240th frame of the strip, which is right here. And so right here, it must be the 240th frame, and that's when it starts. And it will start from the beginning. So there's two ways to fix this. In our instance here, the best way is just to click absolute so that our mask matches frame 673 at frame 673. And so now you can see it follows just as well. Now this works in our situation because we haven't changed our original footage at all. Our original footage down here starts at frame 1. And we have selected a specific frame range and rendered out an image sequence from there. So we're not really moving strips around a lot, which is actually not the normal situation when you're video editing. So it works here in our situation, but most likely you're going to be in a situation where you're moving strips all around. So you're going to actually need to click this relative, because you want the mask animation to be relative to the strip no matter where you move it. And the easy fix for this is come up here to your mask settings, and then here you go. We can change our start and end frame 240 and then tab down 740, because that matches our start and end frame here. And now if I Control R to refresh, you can see that that matches perfectly. And not only that, I can move this over here and it's still going to match perfectly. I can move this anywhere I want because now the mask is relative to the frames of the strip rather than the absolute frames of the timeline. So that was step 3 and 4, tracking our footage and parenting that mask to that tracker. And now step 5, animate the points a little bit in order to adjust them to stay on our face a little bit better. So let's come back to our masking. And what I mean, if I scrub through here, you can see like places like right here, the mask hangs off the face quite a bit. Now this really doesn't matter if you're in a hurry and you need to just do a face blur. As long as the face is blurred, then really you don't have to be too picky about that. Nobody looks at a face blur on footage and it's like, oh, it was off by an inch. So really this last step with animation isn't all that important to a face blur, but it's an easy enough scenario to showing you the workflow that is best used in animating masks, which can be a little tricky. And this is going to set you up for the next few videos in the series. So let's go back to the start frame and make our first keyframe. So if I hover my mouse over here with everything selected, I'm going to press I. And we can't see keyframes for mask on the regular timeline, so we need to change this to the dope sheet. And then in the drop down, we want to change this to mask. And now we can see our keyframe, which is this little diamond shaped thing here. If I click out to deselect, it's white. If I click it, it's yellow, means that it's selected. And I'm just going to click and drag this in to hide that summary. Now I've lost my play and pause buttons and stuff here and my frame range because that's part of the timeline. So what I'm going to do is just drag one up here, change this to the timeline, and then pull that all the way down so we can just see that header of the timeline, which gives us all that same information. And back to the first frame. So now all the points of the mask are stored in this keyframe here. And from here on out, to make our lives easier, I'm just going to click this button here, which is auto keying. Now be careful, because if you turn auto keying on and you forget that it's on, it could cause a whole lot of trouble in the future, making keyframes in a whole bunch of places that you don't want keyframes. I forget this all the time, so let's remember that it's on together. And a lot of people, when they get to this step, add keyframes in sort of a traditional animation style. So they'll pick a frame range, like every 10 frames or every 20 frames, they'll add a keyframe and then move stuff. However, when you're trying to match video footage, I find that that's actually not really the best way to do it, because you want to use your footage as a guide rather than arbitrary frames. So what I do instead is I start with the biggest motions. And what I mean by that is when I move from one position to the next. So here it would be these extreme positions of my head. So my head is rocking to the right over here, and then it goes to the left, and it goes up and down, and changes positions as I'm doing my thing. And that has nothing to do with the number of the frames. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the first extreme movement that I don't want, where the mask is hanging off my face too much. And that's probably right here. But I'm not going to make a keyframe here just yet. But I am going to come over here to the frame and Control C to copy that, because we'll come back to this. But I'm going to go to the first frame that is okay, that I like before this change. So right here, 452, I like this. This is matching my face exactly how I want it to. So I'm going to make a keyframe here by just pressing I again, and we're making a manual keyframe here. But now if I paste that 505 back here, now all I have to do is come in and change the position of these to match that a little bit better. And so now it will start at our good keyframe and slowly transition into our modified one. And then what we can do is come in the middle of here to where it might be off a little bit, like from here to here, and change that to make sure that's not going off the face too much. And I actually might even take this, if I click and drag, I can move that over a bit. Okay, yeah, and I like that better. So you can see with the help of the tracking marker and watching the extreme motion of the footage, we only need 4 keyframes for half of the footage. So if I scrub here, you can see everything lines up fairly well for a face blur. And then when we have our extreme motion, that's when we add our keyframes. And so we don't have that much deviation from the face now. So I'm going to do this again for the rest of the footage, just scrub through my timeline. And here we go. Oh, that's really big right there. Oh yeah, so I'm just going to go to the extreme position there. I'm going to copy this here and then go back to where it was good. I think like right there. Okay. At least have one of the points selected, but I'm going to select all of them. Press I to make a manual keyframe, paste to go back here, and just adjust. Just adjust on Justin. Okay, now we can see what that looks like. Yep, and that's good. So next one, keyframe 710. Right here. I paste and move this here. Yep, that's good enough. And then, you know, I'm going to use this keyframe as the good keyframe, and then it's going to morph into one that I'll just make here like this. So between those two, yeah. Yep, there we go. And now we can play this and see. And I could do it on these two, depending on how nitpicky you want to be as when it goes off of the face. But again, it's a face blur. It doesn't need to be that nitpicky. And I think what we have here is pretty good. So one thing I should mention is that you want to make sure your feather, if you're using a feather, is set before you start doing these animations. If for some reason it's not, or maybe it is and you want to get rid of it, let me show you how to do that. So right here on our first frame, we can select everything, come over here to clear feather weight. But as I press play, it's going to pop right back on there because we have our feather weight stored in all of our keyframes. So the best way to change this for all of them at once is to come to the beginning and then just click this button, Reset Feather Animation, and press play. And now you can see it's gone from all of our keyframes. Now this works the opposite way. Alt-S to scale. Let's say you don't have it set and you want to have it set. Just Reset Feather Animation. There you go. And now it stays. And this will prevent you from having to go to each keyframe and reanimating each of those points. And speaking of, let's just say we've done all of our animation and you're like, actually I want more of my head covered. So it's the same concept. So we have this. Let's say I want it to be something more like this. Press I to make that keyframe there. If I press play, you can see it's fine, but it starts to shrink back slowly to its original position. And that's because we've only changed it for this one keyframe. So we want to be able to change it for all of the rest of them as well. So let's hover our mouse over the timeline, press A to select all of the keyframes, and then we also want to shift click this one. For some reason I found it works best if we deselect the one that we're on. Okay, it looks like we lost that data, so I'm just going to bring this back up here. Select everything, press I, and now we can come over here right under Reset Feather Animation, Rekey Shape Points, which recalculates the animation data on the selected points for the frames that we select in the dope sheet. So we can choose which frames we want this to apply to, which right now is all of them. So I'm going to click that, and a little box here pops up. We can actually select location, feather, or both of them, which is really nice. So I want both of them in this instance. So let's close that and press play. And now you can see it stays the way we had it changed and interpolates that, if that's the right word, into the rest of the frames. Of course, now, because we've made it bigger, we still might need to animate and adjust some of these. I'm not going to turn auto keying on. I'm just going to I to add a keyframe there, and this one as well. I. Okay, so that would be the workflow. But actually, I don't want any of that. So let's just undo all of that work we did. Back to what we had. Okay, so let's actually see this with our face blur. Alt-H to unhide that Gaussian blur and play. And this is going really, really slow. We're never going to be able to see this in real time unless we wait for that to cache in. But every time that the cache refreshes, we won't be able to see it in real time. So the best thing to do in this situation is just to render out a blurred image sequence, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to hide this one, just leaving our blur. Don't forget to save it. And let's come back to our rendering here, F12. And output properties. So I'm going to create a new folder. Instead of footage, I'm going to call this IMSQ blur. And then, of course, for the name of each image, I'm going to say blur and then leave that underscore. Everything else is the same as I want it to be. So let's save it again. And let's just make sure that these match real quick here. We can scroll out here a little bit better. Yep, that all looks like it matches. So Control F12 to render out an image sequence. And this is going a lot slower than our original one because we didn't have the calculation of that Gaussian blur, which Blender seems to really have a hard time with. So I'll let this finish rendering and then I'll be back. All right, it's done. So let's go back to our video editing. Go to the beginning, and oh, I just noticed we have our auto keying still on. So let's uncheck that and then add in an image sequence. And let's go up to now our image sequence blur. Make sure it's sorted the right way in order, and then add those in. Grab that, move that up. Okay, but we don't actually need these two down here. So I'm just going to get rid of those. because we just want our blur. So let's unhide the top, and now we can play it and we can watch it in real time. It stays relatively close to our face. It doesn't hang off in the ways that it was before because of our animation, and I really like that. So if you want to see that cache that I keep talking about, you have to come up to Edit, Preferences. On Interface, you need to make sure that Developer Extras is on. And then you also need to come to View, and then, where is it? Show Cache, and then Show Cache. But then you also have to go back to Show Cache and then check Final Images. And now you can see here's what's cached in. This orange bar down here, and then right here as well. So if I move my playhead over here, press play, you can see it starts to cache in. And it's taking away from over here because of your cache settings. You can lengthen your cache settings, again, by going to Preferences, System, and Video Sequencer. Here's your memory cache limit. So you can increase or decrease this. Be careful, don't use too much of it. If you use all of your memory for this, your Blender's going to hang your system and it's going to crash. And if it doesn't crash, everything's just going to freeze and you're going to have to do a hard restart. At least that's what I had to do. Just FYI. And because we still have our original footage down here, I can take the original audio, Alt-H to unhide that, and if I play...
Justin, and...
and that's still a little too loud, so with that selected, come to Strip, and then I'm just going to do 0.2 in here.
This is going to be a part
there we go.
of my
that's a little bit
beginner's guide
better.
to masking in Blender. And so we're going to use this.
So there we go. And we can clean this up a little bit, bring these down here. Doesn't really matter. But we're just going to render out this into a movie. So let's go back to our rendering. And let's tell Blender where to put it this time. Let's just do, let's do the double / again. I'm going to put it in a folder called Renders. And then / again to make that a folder. And then just title Face Blur. Same thing, underscore, because it's going to add numbers on the movie as well. And then change this to FFmpeg video. Okay, RGB for color, and then go to encoding and then choose your settings. Now I'm going to show you the settings that I usually like. I do MP4, and then the default here is actually pretty good. So I usually use this for all of my tutorials. You can change the quality here, but the higher quality, the larger the file size, and that's not always necessary. And then audio codec, of course I want an audio, so I'll choose MP3, and the default settings for that is fine. We want to render out the sequencer, which is fine, no compositing, and we are good. So save, and again, let's check our frames, just random frames, F12, making sure that they match our preview over here to here. Looks good to me. So Control F12 to render out that image sequence, and it's not processing any sort of effect strips, Gaussian blur, etc. The only thing it's processing right now is that mask, and so this is going a lot quicker. Okay, so this is what we have.
Hi, welcome to Blender Frenzy. I am Justin, and this is going to be a part of my beginner's guide to masking in Blender. And so we're going to use this for footage. And I apologize right now because, one, I haven't cut my hair. I really need a haircut. As you can see here.
Okay, so that is how you do a face blur in Blender. I hope you're now more familiar and confident with the process. So stay tuned for the next video where we're going to kick it up a notch with some more complicated masking using the rotoscope method.